despite the fact that Joe Lieberman and I won the popular vote. Under our Constitution, it is the winner of the Electoral College who will be the next president.
That was former Vice President Al Gore conceding the election, even though he won the popular vote over George W. Bush. The fight for the presidency in 2000 was decided in the Supreme Court. Welcome to our In Focus segment tonight. Should the Electoral College stay or go? We'll start with an overview of the Electoral Colleges and how the public feels about it. Joining us now is Daman Cann, Professor of Political Science at Utah State University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with how the Electoral College came about. What were our country's founders' reasoning for it?
That's a great question. You know, at the time of the American founding, there was no country in the world that used a direct popular vote to determine who the country's chief executive would be. And most countries at that time were using a system where their legislative branch chose someone to be their president, or chief executive, their prime minister, whatever it might be. And so when the founders looked at that system, they were nervous about Congress choosing the president because they wanted more separation of powers, a little more division between the legislative and executive branch. But on the flip side, the founders were also nervous about giving the people too much authority. Remember, in the Constitution, the original Constitution, the Senate was chosen by state legislators, not directly by the people. And so the founders wanted a little bit of distance between the people and the president. And so between these two forces, the group of founders together sat down, kicked around a bunch of ideas, and just as they neared the end of the convention, put together the concept of the Electoral College, thinking that it pulls it away from Congress to provide a little more separation of powers, but it doesn't go directly to the people, but it allows the will of the people to be filtered through the votes of the electors that serve in the Electoral College.
Yeah, not a lot of people actually know that history. Real quick, we want to pull up this graphic to explain the way electoral votes are counted. So different states have different numbers of electoral votes depending on the population. In most of those states, the winner of the popular vote in that state gets all of the Electoral College votes. But in Maine and Nebraska, the Electoral College votes are broken down by the congressional district. So, Professor, I want to know, where do people generally stand on the Electoral College in the country right now? Do you know if they want to keep it or abolish it?
Yeah, that's a great, another great question. So surveys fairly consistently show that most Americans, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of American adults, tend to say that they would like to see the Electoral College abolished in favor of a national popular vote. But just like so many political issues today, Americans are divided on this issue by political party, with a recent Gallup poll in September showing about 80% of Democrats wishing that the Electoral College were abolished in favor of a national popular vote, but only about 20% of Republicans wanting to see the Electoral College go away.
Well, let's talk about what the process would be if we were to get rid of the Electoral College. What would it take for that to happen?
So the main route that most people have thought about is, you know, we've had discussions about the Electoral College for decades. Generations of American politics have raised some of these same questions about it. And for a long time, people who wanted to see change felt like it required a constitutional amendment. Because the Constitution spells out that the Electoral College exists and that the electors that are appointed in a manner directed by the state legislatures are the ones who choose the president. So it looks on face like it would require a constitutional amendment. But there's actually a group that's come up with a little bit of a clever initiative. The Constitution doesn't spell out how states have to allocate their electors. The Constitution just says that state legislatures get to decide how it happens. And so, as you mentioned, Maine and Nebraska do things a little bit differently, where they go by congressional district rather than allocating all of their electoral votes to whoever wins their state. A state legislature could enter into an interstate compact, another constitutionally allowed device, where that was created so that states could join and cooperate with each other on various projects. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says that if enough states sign on to the compact, those states would promise to give their electoral college votes to whoever won the national popular vote. So if we got enough states to ratify the National Popular Vote Compact, that would be adding up to 270 electoral votes, then that would effectively, while the Electoral College would still be in place, it would mean that a majority of Electoral College delegates would be pledged to vote for whoever won the popular vote, effectively transitioning the United States to a popular vote system for president.
That process is definitely pretty difficult and arduous. Folks, you've been hearing from Daman Cann, professor of political science at Utah State University. Professor Cann, thank you so much for joining us tonight with your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Within a 1 percentage point race, about 4 in 10 elections will be inversions. It's always been the case that if an election is close, there's a very high chance that it ends up with a mismatch between the popular vote and the Electoral College outcome.
That was economist Michael DeRusso talking about election inversions, which is when the Electoral College results don't match with the popular vote results. We've had 4 inversions over the history of our country. 2 have come in the last 20 years, with Presidents George Bush and Donald Trump losing popular vote, but winning the presidency. Joining us now is Lauren Simpson, the policy director at the Alliance for a Better Utah. She's thinking about the Electoral College and feels the country should move on from it. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Let's start with how the Constitution says that the method for choosing the President of the United States should be the Electoral College. Do you think that process is still practical and useful?
So the short answer is no. And I want to start out talking about democracy because that's the core value that we really all believe in. Democracy is the bedrock of this country. And that's the idea that, you know, the political power that exists in this country comes from the people. It's the people are the ones who are in charge of who gets elected to government. And they're the ones who really hold the power to say what that should look like. So the problem that we have under our current system with the Electoral College is that while every vote is counted, not every vote matters equally. If you're a Republican in California or a Democrat in Wyoming, your vote really doesn't have an impact on who the president is. And that's something that could be changed so that our government does feel more inclusive and more reflective of what the will of the people is.
What would you say to those who feel that residents in rural areas or low population states will no longer have a say in the presidential election if we were to abolish that process and that candidates will only campaign in highly populated areas?
Yeah, so the system that you're describing where, you know, it's a small handful of people who have a really outsized influence in who gets to be the president of the United States, that's actually the system that we're living in right now. Right? Under the Electoral College, it's only a few swing states who really see heavy campaigning or whose votes really make a big difference in who the next president of the United States is. And so if we were to shift, presidents actually would have to campaign, candidates would have to campaign nationwide. It wouldn't be just limited to cities. But it would also be fundamentally more fair because everybody's vote would count equally. It's a really sensible position to take that the person who the most people vote for to be the president of the United States should be the next president of the United States.
What do you think about the idea of splitting Utah's electoral votes the way that Nebraska and Maine do so that the votes more reflect the popular vote?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. And I think it's illustrative of the problem that we currently have, that these states are being creative and being proactive and trying to make their electoral votes more reflective of what people want. So in Nebraska and Maine, you have states that split their electoral votes kind of according to their congressional districts. That's certainly one way to do it. There's an argument that that really incentivizes gerrymandering and increases, you know, partisan battles over the lines of those congressional districts. Another way to do something very similar would be to split the electoral votes in a state just based on proportionality with the candidates who receive certain shares of the vote.
Now, we have about 90 seconds left. I want to put the ball back in your court. What other arguments do you have for abolishing the Electoral College that we haven't gotten a chance to talk to you about yet?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's really fundamental. It's about democracy, and it's about making sure that everybody's vote matters. You know, and we have the Senate, which is the body of government that really is weighted more heavily in favor of rural states, low population states. But when it comes to the President of the United States, the President is the President for everyone, and it makes sense that everyone should have an equal say in who that person is, regardless of what state you live in, what zip code you live in, who your neighbors are voting for. Your vote should matter. And I think that process would feel a lot more fair to people, and would hopefully reduce the sort of disenchantment that a lot of people have with government. So I think it could be a really healing thing for the nation.
Very insightful perspective. All right, you've been hearing from Lauren Simpson, Policy Director for the Alliance for Better Utah. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and providing your insight.
Thanks so much for having me.
2016 is a very clear-cut case where the popular vote did not match the Electoral College vote. Because it's a winner-take-all system, because of the distribution of Democrats and Republicans across the country, we saw in 2016 Hillary Clinton winning 3 million more votes by the popular vote, but they were in states where at a certain point in time, it didn't put her over the edge or really matter anymore.
That was Professor Christina Greer from Fordham University talking about how Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016. But because her votes were concentrated in urban areas, she ended up losing the presidency. The argument over the Electoral College comes down to how strong certain voices should be. The Founding Fathers felt that it was needed so less populated states would not be drowned out by more populated states. Joining us for our third and final In Focus segment is Michelle Quist, columnist for the Salt Lake Tribune. She feels that the Electoral College is an important part of how we elect our president. Michelle, we really appreciate you for being here tonight. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Yeah, let's start with how the Constitution says that the method for choosing the president of the U.S. should be the Electoral College. Do you think that that process is still practical and useful?
You know, that process works 90% of the time to elect the person who wins the popular vote. I don't know any other system that works more than 90% that we're seeking to abolish. Yes, I think it works, and I think we need to stick with it. The Electoral College helps increase the influence of minority groups because they're working within states as opposed to across the whole nation, like we saw in Arizona with the Native American vote. It also ensures that the winner of the presidency is elected by a majority and not a plurality vote. And then, of course, like as you know, it ensures that the whole country isn't a flyover country, as you have candidates going from the populous states of New York to Texas to California, and that's all they need to do. And you know, the Electoral College ensures that each state matters, and I think it's working, and I think we should keep it.
Now, you say that the core of this country is a republic of states, and the Electoral College gives all states a say. Why is that important for a presidential election?
Well, we're a union. We were created as a more perfect union of states. The idea isn't that going to a popular vote, a national election, will ensure that there's more democracy at play. There's democracy at play. It's one man for one vote, one woman for one vote in every state. And the states are, you know, the foundation of the nation that we live in. And so the question isn't about more democracy. The question is about federalism. And, you know, if that's the question, then that's the conversation we should be having.
What do you say to people who feel that the system is broken when we've had 4 U.S. presidents who won the popular vote and did not become president?
Again, the system works more than 90% of the time to elect the person who won the popular vote. And again, the system is created so that the winner, the president, the person in the White House that, you know, is the symbol of America, needs to win the popular vote and a geographical, spread of the states to ensure that everybody is represented. It's not just about what California and New York want. Montana, Wyoming, Utah has different interests and different values, and the president needs to represent them as much as the more populous states.
What do you think about the idea of splitting Utah's electoral college votes the way that Nebraska and Maine do, so that the votes more reflect the popular vote?
I don't think in Utah it will make a big difference. I think, it would still be split up by congressional district, and I think Utah is so heavily Republican that Republicans would still win the electoral, the nomination for each election. It's an interesting idea, but again, the system that we live in is a federalism system, and states are the foundation. States have certain rights and responsibilities to their citizens, and I think that's a system that it works.
Just wanted to get your take on something that our previous guest, Lauren Simpson, brought up. She says that the Senate is a place where all states have equal voices and that it's a lawmaking body and that the president is for everyone. What's your take on that?
The president is for everyone, and everyone includes everyone in each state. If you go to a national election for president, the people, the people in the middle just aren't going to matter. The president isn't going to worry about the citizens in Wyoming because they didn't make a difference in her election. And so I think the system that we have ensures that the person in the White House is representing everybody as opposed to just the populous states.
We have about 1 minute left. I wanted to put the ball back in your court. What other arguments do you have for keeping the Electoral College that maybe we haven't addressed yet in this discussion?
Again, I think that the question is democracy at play, and democracy is at play in each state. And I think the Electoral College ensures that the person running for the presidency, for the executive office, is going to pay attention to each state in the geographical locations and their different values and their different interests. And I think this system has been working more than 90% of the time to elect the popular president, and I think a president should be able to increase their geographical spread, and I think the system works and we should keep it.
All right, you've been hearing from Michelle Quist, columnist for the Salt Lake Tribune. Michelle, thanks for being here and providing us perspectives from both sides. It's been a pleasure having you on our show.
No problem, thanks.